So, as you know, we'll be discussing the life of the great saint, Saint Francis of Assisi, with the help of course, some wonderful pictures which I will share with you. So, let me just I hope you can see the pictures. I'll be sharing all the pictures here. So let me start with an introduction by Mr. Chesterton, who has written a life of Saint Francis of Assisi in his own unique way. So this short introduction will tell us about the unique qualities of the saint. So in the beginning, he tells us that there are three ways in which one can write the life of Saint Francis. So I'll just quote him. He says, a sketch of Saint Francis of Assisi can be written in one of the three ways. What are the three ways? First of all, the writer may deal with this great and most amazing man as a figure in secular history and a model of social virtues. He may describe this divine messenger as the world's one quiet, sincere democrat. He may say that Saint Francis was in advance of his age. He may say that Saint Francis anticipated all that is most liberal and sympathetic in the modern mood, the love of nature, the love of animals, the sense of social compassion, the sense of the spiritual dangers of prosperity, and even of property. All those things that nobody understood before Wordsworth were familiar to Saint Francis. All those things that were first discovered by Tolstoy had been taken for granted by Saint Francis, not only as a human but a humanitarian hero, indeed as the first hero of humanism. He has been described as a sort of morning star of the Renaissance. So this is one way in which we can write his life, purely on humanistic grounds. Then, what is the second way? He says, second, the author may go to the opposite extreme and decide, as it were, to be defiantly devotional. He may make the theological enthusiasm as thoroughly the theme as it was the theme of the first Franciscans. He may treat religion as the real thing that it was to Saint Francis of Assisi. He can find an austere joy, so to speak, in parading the paradoxes of asceticism and all the holy topsy-turvydom of humility. He can stamp the whole history with the stigmata, record fasts like fights against a dragon. In short, he can produce what many in our world will regard as a sort of photographic negative, the reversal of all lights and shades, what the foolish will find as impenetrable as darkness, and even many of the wise will find almost as invisible as if it were written in silver upon white. Such a study of Saint Francis would be unintelligible to anyone who does not share his religion, perhaps only partly intelligible to anyone who does not share his vocation. The only difficulty about doing the thing in this way is that it cannot be done, he says. To view Saint Francis as a purely spiritual person, he says, cannot be done. Why? Because the answer is simple and very amusing. He says it would really require a saint to write the life of a saint. That's why it cannot be done in this way. So he proposes a third way, and he says that I have decided to write in a third way. The writer may put himself in the position of the ordinary modern outsider and inquirer. He may start from the standpoint of a man who already admires Saint Francis, but only for those things which such a man finds admirable. He may try to use what is understood to explain what is not understood. So, spiritual things we cannot understand. That's why he says he will try to use what is understood to explain what is not understood. He may say to the modern English reader, here is an historical character which is admittedly attractive to many of us already by its gaiety, its romantic imagination, and its spiritual courtesy, but which also contains elements which seem to you quite remote. But after all, this man was a single man and not half a dozen men. What seems inconsistency to you did not seem inconsistent to him. Let us see whether we can understand, with the help of the existing understanding, those other things that seem now to be so dark. Dark means, here he means that spiritual things are dark to ordinary persons like us. So he adopts a third method. Of course, we will not go further into the life which he has written. So, in order to understand a little of this life of Saint Francis, it is first we should know in what period, at what period of time he was born. So, that period of time in which Saint Francis took birth is known as the Middle Ages or medieval period of Europe. So what is that? We will see here. First, I'll show another beautiful sculpture of Saint Francis. You can see here. And now, so this is the diagram you can see. Middle Ages. In the history of Europe, the Middle Ages or medieval period lasted approximately from the late 5th to the late 15th centuries. 5th to the 15th centuries, aligning with the post-classical period of global history. So the Middle Ages began with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD and ended with the fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD. So even the Middle Ages is the middle period of the three traditional divisions of Western history, that is antiquity, medieval and modern. So the whole of European history has been divided into three parts. First is ancient or called antiquity, second is medieval, and the third is modern. So Saint Francis was born in the medieval period. What are the characteristics of that period? Population decline, counter-urbanization, the collapse of centralized authority, invasion, and the mass migration of tribes, which had begun in late antiquity, continued into the early Middle Ages. The large-scale movements of the migration period, including of Germanic people, led to the rise of a new kingdoms in Western Europe. In the 7th century, the Middle East and North Africa came under caliphal rule with the Arab conquests. In the West, most kingdoms incorporated extant Roman institutions, while the influence of Christianity expanded across Europe. So at that time, the influence of Christianity was expanding. But at the same time, actually, Saint Francis was a reformer, as we will see. At the same time, many things had crept up into the church, which were not part of the teachings of Jesus. They had deviated from the original ideal, and it was saints like Saint Francis which again tried to put them on the right path. So now let us start from the birth of Saint Francis. What was his earlier name? Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone. That was his name given at his birth. He was, of course, known as the Saint Francis of Assisi. Which country did he belong? He was an Italian saint, Italian mystic and Catholic friar who founded what is now known as the Franciscans, particular sect. His full name contemporarily could be translated to John Peter Francis Bernardone. So Giovanni is akin to John. So in today's language, if you want to translate, it would be John Peter Francis Bernardone. He was inspired to lead a life of poverty as an itinerant preacher. And according to one view, apart from Virgin Mary, he is the best known and the most honored of Catholic saints. Such a great compliment has been paid to this saint. And Francis was canonized by Pope Gregory IX on 16 July 1228. And in the pictures and artwork in which he is depicted, he is usually depicted in a brown habit with a rope around his waist with 3 knots. So if you see the picture of Saint Francis, the rope which he ties around his waist has 3 knots. Why 3? Those stand for the Franciscan vows. What are those vows? Of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So these are the vows which every Franciscan takes. And according to the Christian tradition, in 1224, Francis received the stigmata during the apparition of an angel when he was in a spiritual ecstasy. So all these we will see. And he founded the men's order of Friars Minor, also the women's order of Saint Clare, the third order of Saint Francis, and the custody of the Holy Land. And Francis, it is we should know that he is also associated with patronage of animals and the environment. It became customary for churches to hold ceremonies blessing animals on his feast day of 4th October. Along with Catherine of Siena, he was designated patron saint of Italy. So Francis is the patron saint of Italy. And in 1986, when Pope John Paul II organized a conference of world religious leaders to promote peace. He held it in no other place but Assisi, the birthplace of Saint Francis. Such is his importance. And many of us may not know, at least I did not know, that San Francisco in USA, how did the name come? It is named after Saint Francis. Yeah. He is so widely honored. Now let us start with his birth. Saint Francis was born in 1181. Of course, we know the place was Assisi. So, where is that place? Let us see. That place is a hill town in central Italy's Umbria region, Umbria. If I do not pronounce any word correctly, please forgive me, because there are a lot of various pronunciations going on of these words, so very difficult to say which is the correct one. So he was born in Umbria, Italy, and here, first of all, here you can see, in this photograph you can see Saint Francis with that robe. You will notice that it has 3 knots. Those 3 knots, as we have seen, they denote the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, where is Umbria? You can see from the map, and I have circled Assisi in red. So you can see clearly this is the district of Umbria in Italy, and the location of Assisi also you can see in the map. And this is where Umbria is in the whole of Italy. So you can see we can say central Italy. So Saint Francis of Assisi's father was a very rich person he was a merchant, he was dealing in silks and clothes. September 26 is celebrated as his birthday in Assisi, but actually it can't be verified. No one actually knows when he was born. So as a child, he was given the name John, as we have seen. Giovanni in Italy is akin to John in English. Most probably he was named John by his mother. And the child's father had been to France on business at the time of his birth. So he was not there when the child was named John. So when he returned, he insisted that the child's name should be changed to Francesco. That is, in English, Francis. Actually, what does it mean, Francis? It means Frenchman. Yeah. So why? Because the French were supposed to be very cultured and all that at that time. So his father was a more or less worldly person. So he thought that he should change the name, signifying his desire that his child should become a cultured man of the world. But actually, we see that this desire of his father was not really satisfied. Francis did not become a man of the world. The name John was more apt because he became something like John the Baptist. So there's a legend, of course, nobody can verify the truth. The legend is that when the time came for Francis's mother to give birth, they said that the child could not be born. So just then a pilgrim came to the door, and he said that in this palatial building and your bedroom, this child will not be born. So what should they do? They should go to the stable. His mother should go to the stable and lie on the straw, because this child is such a follower, going to be such a great follower of Jesus, that he can only be born in such austere circumstances. So it is said that no sooner had Francis' mother done so, the saint was born. And Even now in Assisi, this stable stands. And now it is converted into a chapel, and there is an inscription there which reads, "This oratory was the stable of ox and ass, in which Francis, the mirror of the world, was born." Yeah. So this great place, it's such a beautiful place. I'll show you some photographs. See the wonderful landscape you can see. And show you another photograph here. This has been taken in the evening. Yeah, high resolution photographs I searched, and it is really wonderful. In the big screen, if you see, in the television, it looks so wonderful. Yeah, this is Francis. This is Assisi. This is the main attraction of Assisi, and most of you know what it is. It is the Basilica of Saint Francis. It's a huge structure, as you can see. And of course, those who make a pilgrimage, they go there. Another photograph of the basilica I will show from another angle. You can see here such a huge structure. Beautiful photograph. So as this child grew, he was taught French and Latin by the priests at a neighboring church. And even as a young boy, he began to assist his father in the cloth shop, and he showed himself very skilled at business. He was an expert in business, but he had one very problematic trait. What was that? He was very extravagant and wasteful. Yeah. So this did not go well with his father, we can assume, because his father was a man very much attached to the riches. So at this time, actually, what was happening was Francis was acting according to the name which his father had given him, that is like a Frenchman. So he was swept from his feet by the ideals of chivalry and the knight which took birth in the courts of love in the Provence and with the Norman kings in Sicily. So all those tales of courts and loves and chivalry, they began to attract the young Francis. The boy was not satisfied, as his father was, with merely earning and saving money. He wanted to turn that money into enjoyment. So we will see the house where Francis spent his young days. First of all, some wonderful photographs of the inside of the basilica. Just see the structure. One feels like one should immediately go into this church. All these are, you can see all around the frescoes, those are paintings. So the whole life of Saint Francis has been, Francis of Assisi has been painted there. Such a wonderful, huge structure. Another photograph of the inside. So here we can see on the left side, unfortunately, some paintings have been damaged due to age or something. They have been. But of course, this is very much there still. This is the house where Saint Francis spent his young days. So these structures are so strong, you see, these are ancient times. That's why even in modern days, they are absolutely strong. Fortunately. Another view of this house, just the door, I will show you. This is the door. So here he spent his young days. So as we were saying that Francis in his young age was rather extravagant and prone to enjoyment, and he had no problem in satisfying this desire. Why? Because he was the son of the richest merchant in Assisi. So naturally, he had the capacity to get hold of money as soon as he could spend it. So naturally, a young boy fond of enjoyment, all the young guys of the town have to flock to him. He is so liberal with his money. So naturally, Francis became the leading social figure among the youth of his town. But there is another side also. We should not get carried away in describing the boy's dissipation, so to say. He no doubt spent his money lavishly on food and drink for himself and his friends, but even then, he had a heart which melted for the poor. And it is not that like selfish people, he spent only on himself and his friends. No. He was very liberal in even giving his money to all those who really required it. For he was, as a writer says, he was thoroughly imbued with the medieval faith in the words of Christ. As long as you did it to one of these, my least brethren, you did it to me. So what you do for your brethren, Christ says, you do for me. So he obeyed that and he tried his most to help others. So one example, one day as he was busy selling cloth in the shop, a beggar came asking for alms. So in Italy, he said, Italian, he said, per l'amor di Dio. Now, Dio is God in Italian. So what does it mean? Per l'amor di Dio means, please give something for the love of God. But Francis was very busy with customers and all that. So he gave nothing and the beggar walked away empty-handed. But as soon as Francis got some time, immediately he remembered that, a person had asked him and he did not give him anything. So he thought if that beggar had made his request in the name of some great prince, I would have surely given him what he asked. But he asked in the name of the King of Kings, and I sent him away empty-handed. So he resolved never again to refuse anyone who begged in the name of God, and ran to find the beggar and give him what he asked. So this wonderful sculpture of Francis you can see here. Most probably it is there in the Basilica only. Very, very high resolution photograph. You can see all the details here. And this is a wonderful diagram you can see below, that the beggar is walking away and Saint Francis is at his father's shop. And he will run away to give the beggar what he had asked for. So Francis was endowed with the poet's passion for nature, and in this too, he seemed to be living up to his name, the Frenchman. Why? The district of Umbria in which lay Assisi was a beautiful place. Rich food to his eyes and heart, the mountains and valleys, the vineyards, everything spoke of beauty. So, but as soon there was to be a purging of this passion of Saint Francis, because after all, he was destined to become such a great saint. And this passion was transformed. The passion for the world was transformed into passion for Christ. As one German mystic has said, no one has a true love for created things unless he has first forsaken it for the love of God. so that it has been dead for him and he dead for it. So worldly things become dead for those who love God. Worldly thing becomes dead for him and he becomes dead to worldly things. That is the meaning of this. So here we can see another painting of the saint, and if you see on his hands here, you will find two dots on both of his hands. Those are the marks of the stigmata. We will see all that later. So in his 23rd year, Francis became very ill, seriously ill. So much so that for some time there was a doubt whether he would survive or not. And his convalescence lasted several months. And by the time he was cured, he was very much, he became a sort of different person. The youthful fervor, the passion for life, the love of nature which he had, all seemed dead. Though his body had been cured, something, it is said, something within his heart had withered. The young Francis didn't quite understand what was wrong. Why is this happening? Why am I losing this zest for life? But he did not realize that actually this was the grace of God, preparing his heart for the entry of his Son, God's Son, which is, who as we know is Jesus. Because as long as the heart is busy, is full of created things, it is said there is no room for the holy child of the Creator. Because Jesus loves nothing so much as poverty of spirit. Poverty of spirit, what does it mean? Here, poverty of spirit means that there is no love for the world. There is no attachment for the things of the world. So Francis, of course, at that time he did not understand what was happening. He thought that something wrong is there. I don't feel like any desire to enjoy and all that. So he thought that chivalry still attracted him. So his chance came. At that time, there was a war being raged in southern Italy between the Germans and the Pope over the throne of the emperor. If you read the European history, there was a long conflict between the church and the kings. Each is trying to grab power. That was the level of corruption, you can say, the church had reached. So a surge of national inspiration brought the Italians under the banner of the Pope in order to throw out the foreign forces, and one of the noblemen of Assisi armed himself to go with a small band to aid the Pope's army, and Francis also joined them. Just another photograph of Francis. So, of course, Francis was a wealthy merchant's son. No expense was spared for him, because in war you can't go with your robe and all that. You have to have a sword, shield, all that. So he was given all those things. There was no dearth of money. But just before starting, Francis, whose heart always melted at the sight of another's need, saw a noble man who could not clothe himself properly due to poverty. So immediately Francis removed his own costly garments and gave them to that nobleman in exchange for his ordinary clothes. So that night, some say, as a divine reward for his generosity, Francis had the dream of the palace filled with armor bearing the cross of Christ as its coat of arms. The coat of arms, we know that each kingdom has a particular sign. So what did Francis saw? He saw that this coat of arms did not bear the insignia of any kingdom or king. It had the cross of Christ. So he was to be a soldier, but a soldier not of any ordinary king, but of God himself. And the dream, he also heard a voice that all this was to be his. Means he will have his own warriors in time who will renounce everything for Christ and come to him. So the next day he started to take part in the war, but he heard the voice of God calling him during his sleep, telling him to return to Assisi. So God told him that you will not be a warrior, ordinary warrior, you will be warrior for me. That is why Francis did not go for war and he returned. So here is a beautiful depiction. See, Francis is returning from war. So there are two versions of this. The popular version says that Francis went for the war and he was captured. And 1 year he was in captivity. And while he was in captivity, there was a transformation. That is one version. And the second version we have just read, that he did not go because he heard the voice of Christ and he returned. So as Francis re-entered Assisi, he came back. He was wondering at the mysterious ways of God. So when the townspeople saw him, that this fellow is coming back, so they must have asked him, he could not give any reason. Who will believe that he is hearing the voice of Christ and all that? So when they saw that this fellow is returning without reason, they thought that he must have got scared. At that time, it was a horrible thing to be branded a coward and all that. So they began making fun of him. But after some jeering, it is said that they forgave him. And they thought that this is a mad fellow. He must have gone on a whim and come back on a whim, all that. So now Francis came home again and he again started his old life of enjoyment and all that. He was unable to resist the momentum of his old habits and his friends and all that. So he tried to appear jovial as before, but now it could not be. Everything had changed. A conflict had arisen in his heart. At times he unconsciously followed the call of the world, but at other times he awakened to the call of God. The call he had heard before he returned from war. What was that call? So that call was from Jesus. As if Jesus said to him, "Why are you abandoning the Lord to devote yourself to a servant?" Why are you leaving God and devoting yourself to his servant? So this was the call he heard. And when this call came, he felt urged to go into solitude and listen more so that God might tell him what to do exactly. So God is telling him, now you will become my soldier. So for that, what he has to do, God should tell him, no? Otherwise, how could he determine his future course of action? So he went into solitude and awaited instructions from God. So as the conflict grew in intensity, he lost interest in his friends. But the friends, would not let him go easily. Where would they find such a rich person and who is so free with his money? So Francis, even though he did not want, sometimes he played the part of the benevolent host and all those parties and all. So one summer in 1205, an invitation was sent out for a feast, which was to be more lavish than ever. Great feast it was supposed to be. So after dinner, everybody had dinner. After dinner, the party of joyous people, as usual, went about singing in the streets and all that. And Francis also followed them. But instead of singing, he was listening. He was waiting for the call of Jesus. Then suddenly it is said, the Lord touched his heart with such heavenly sweetness that he could neither speak nor move. He became just like a statue. Like Sri Ramakrishna, when he was going in that field and he saw that sight with the black clouds and the white birds, all the food dropped from his hand, he was in ecstasy, in samadhi. Something like that happened to Francis. Immediately he lost complete consciousness of the outside world. And afterwards he said that at that time he had no body consciousness, absolutely. So then the companions, when they were going, they saw Francis is not there. After going some distance, where is Francis? They saw that he was standing at a distance. Then they turned and went back to him. But now it was no longer the same Francis. He had completely become transformed. So they asked him, what are you doing? Why aren't you following us? Then, young boys joke. So they said, why? Are you thinking of your future wife and all that? Why are you not coming with us? So Francis said, yes, you are right. I am thinking of my marriage. I was thinking of marrying the noblest, richest, and most beautiful bride ever seen. So his friends started laughing. Oh, yeah, you will get such a bride and all that. But what was the hidden meaning of the words they did not understand? Because Francis had vowed to wed Lady Poverty, the beloved handsmaid of Christ, rich in spiritual virtue, the bride of all who seek to serve the great king. The great king, if he is to be served, one has to wed poverty. So his friends started joking, etc. But Francis did not hear their laughter. So now he was stung with remorse, that because the transformation had come, so he was remorseful that all the life which had gone by, he had spent all this in worthless enjoyments and all that. From that moment, he began to think little of himself and started thinking only of God. So now he wanted to know clearly what God wanted him to do, because he was sure now that he was the servant of God. So outwardly he continued to live as before, but in place of his friends he now sought the poor. He turned no beggar away. And if he saw someone approaching, he would remove his shirt or belt or whatever he could give, if he had nothing else. So here you can see a beautiful painting where Francis is giving away his cloak to a needy person. Because even while walking through the streets, suddenly and unexpectedly, he would give something to somebody, and in a similar way, he would often be seen going into church to pray. So he did all he could for the poor people, but he was not satisfied with that, because he received some idea that God wanted him to do something big. something which was very important. So what he did, he set out one day on a pilgrimage to Rome, a place where none knew him, so he would not be disturbed by his friends or relatives or anybody. So in front of the church of Saint Peter, he saw his chance that now he was wedded to Lady Poverty. So he has to change his way of living. No more feasts and all that. So he went to Saint Peter's Church in Rome. This is the church. Wonderful structure, as you can see. So in the church, in the front of Church of Saint Peter, he saw number of beggars asking for alms. So what did Francis do? Quietly he went, he borrowed the clothes of one of the beggars. And stood with them to beg his alms. So it is said that so long Francis has worshipped poverty from a distance, but now he tasted for himself the wonderful freedom of holy poverty. This was not ordinary poverty. Ordinary poverty means a person wants to enjoy, but he cannot enjoy. That is a different thing altogether. So this Francis, the poverty of Francis is called holy poverty because it was self-denial for the sake of the highest attainment, the attainment of God. So he begged with the beggars, and after a while, he again put on his own garments and returned to Assisi, all the while praying to Jesus for his guidance. Then back in Assisi, Francis was praying one day when suddenly he received what he was searching. What was that? A message from Christ himself. So what was that message? The Lord said, "O Francis, if you want to know my will, you must hate and despise all that you have loved for so long and desired to possess for so long." For so long you have loved the world, desired to possess worldly things. Now, if you want to know my will, you must hate and despise all those things. Once you begin to do this, all that formerly had seemed very sweet to you will become bitter and unbearable. And instead, the things that formerly made you shudder will bring you great sweetness and content. So this was the message he received from Christ, that he has to despise what he had previously longed for. So he began to ponder over the meaning of those words. That what does Christ mean? I should embrace what I did not like so long, and what should I do? Then one day, as he was riding his horse, he saw a leper standing just a few steps away. So his first thought was to go away because leper, everybody avoids them. But he now remembered the words of God, that what you had formerly despised, now you should embrace. And what formerly made you afraid will bring you great sweetness. So what did he do? He jumped from his horse in joy, put his arms in the leper's hand. The arms he had got from St. Peter's Church, those arms he put in the leper's hand, bent down and kissed the rotting fingers of that leper, and which were giving a very bad smell. But when Francis kissed that leper's hand, it is said he felt an unknown sweetness welling up in his soul, flooding and overflowing it in an ever increasing purity. By doing that thing, he felt a tremendous bliss, some kind of divine bliss. So Francis felt that now he had fulfilled the command of God. And God now fulfilled his promise. God had told him that if you embrace what you had despised earlier, you will find it very sweet. So Francis also found great joy and sweetness in kissing that leper's hand. So much so that the next day Francis came to the leper's hospital in Assisi, which formerly he had avoided from a great distance. So when he reached the hospital, all the lepers gathered around him with their half-rotted faces, crumbling fingers, corrupted arms, and inflamed eyes. But Francis opened his purse, gave a coin to each, and kissed each of their hands. And it is said that the consolations received from God when he did this overwhelmed him with a divine joy. So now Francis has become a transformed man, and he was receiving direct instructions from Jesus himself. He was praying earnestly and his prayers were being responded to. So one day after this happened with the lepers, some days afterwards, Francis was at the dilapidated chapel of San Damiano, Damiano, Damiano. So that it was in a very dilapidated condition, that church. So Francis was there praying before Christ. What was his prayer? Great and glorious God, my Lord Jesus Christ, I implore thee to enlighten me and to disperse the darkness of my soul. Give me true faith and firm hope and a perfect charity. Grant me, O Lord, to know thee so well that in all things I may act by thy light and in accordance with thy holy will. So he wanted to take complete shelter in God so that God would direct all his actions. So as he uttered this prayer, all the love and longing, all the joy and sorrow, all the fervency and struggle of the past year became concentrated into one intense cry of the light, heart for light. So what Sri Ramakrishna says, pray with great earnestness. So all his energy, so to say, for the past year became concentrated into one intense cry. And when a person calls in this way, God cannot remain unmoved. So Christ heard and also answered him. What was the answer? Christ said, now go hence, Francis, and build up my house. House means this church of San Damiano where he was standing. Christ said, it is nearly falling down. Now I give you the responsibility of rebuilding this church. So Francis replied in amazement, gladly I will do so, Lord. So this saying of Christ has two meanings. First of all, Christ wanted him to rebuild the church of San Damiano. But what was Francis understood at that time? But the second meaning was the Christ Christ wanted him to repair not only that small church, but the church of the whole Christendom, the whole Christian church. Why? Because it was slowly straying away from the teachings of Christ. It was going away from the narrow path of renunciation, of poverty, of prayer. Luxury was entering, love of power was entering. So this has two meanings, Christ's call. First, the small church he was supposed to rebuild, and of course, then the whole of the Christian world he was to reform. Such a great task had been given to him. So first of all, Francis thought that Jesus just wanted him to rebuild this church. So in this church I will. So here this is first we will see the Francis and the leper. Yeah, Francis is holding a leper in his hand. And this is the church where Francis prayed and God told him to rebuild it. This is as it is now. It's very much there in Assisi. And yeah, and we will also see the inside of this church. This is the inside. Yeah, beautiful photograph. Very, very clear, high resolution photograph. So then Francis thought that Jesus had asked him to rebuild this church. And he immediately went to the priest of the church. So Francis told him that what the message he had received and all that. So now Francis gave the priest some money. And he told him, I beg you, sir, to buy oil and keep the lamp before this image of Christ constantly alight. And when that oil is spent, when the money is spent, I will give you more money. So from this hour till the end of his life, it is said, Francis carried in his heart the wound of Christ's passion. And often his heart would melt in love and compassion for the sufferings of Christ on earth. So much so that he would forget food and drink, and his eyes would overflow with tears at the slightest suggestion of the sufferings of Jesus. Now, Francis thought he had to rebuild the church, but rebuilding the church was not a small thing. And his father would never give him money to do all that, he knew. So what did he do? He thought, no use asking my father. So he hurried home and he himself took some rolls of fine cloth from his father's shop, loaded them onto a horse and took them to a neighboring market town. Then he sold, he not only sold the cloth, he also sold the horse. For a large sum, returned to the church, found the priest and gave him that money, saying that it was for the church's restoration. But this, the priest did not take the money because he thought, this fellow, from where will he get all this money? From where he has got, who knows? And he's just giving him his whim, because everybody knew Francis was a man who was very fond of enjoyments. The son was such a rich person. So he probably thought, tomorrow if he comes and asks the money back, from where will I give him? So he refused it. And he was also afraid of Francis's father. That what would he come? He said, my child does not know anything. You've taken all his money. So he did not accept that. And when Francis' father, who had gone outside for some business, when he came, he heard about the great exploits of his son, that this fellow is taking whatever he wants and selling it. So in great anger, he went to San Damiano's church, where Francis had been staying. Francis did not go home, but he stayed in the church after hearing the voice of Christ. So Francis, when he found out that the father is coming, he immediately left the place and hid himself in a cave, because he knew what his father would do. So the priest showed Pietro. Pietro means Francis' father, all that money. He gave. So at least his father returned home somewhat mollified. And many days Francis did not return home. He remained in the cave because he feared his father. So his mother secretly came and gave him food and all that. But he did not waste his time in the cave. His unceasing prayers, fasting, and trust in God were such that stay in the cave served as a sort of spiritual penance. And his heart was filled with a divine joy and a radiant light. So such was the grace he received. He overcame all his fear and left the cave. He was now not afraid to face his father. So he entered Assisi, and everybody could make out that something has changed. He's not the same boy. And his appearance was absolutely ragged appearance, So some people started mocking him. Some people started throwing mud and all that at him. But his inner peace was such that he was not conscious of anything. He did not care for anything. So father heard the noise. Father in his house, he heard the noise. People were jeering, mocking. Immediately he came out and he saw his son in the midst of a jeering crowd covered with mud. And it is said that there were some wounds also because some stones had been thrown. So he was terribly angry, his father. And humiliation, such a great man. And his son was wandering like a beggar. People were making fun of him. So what did he do? He grabbed Francis, and not only he did not wipe the blood and all, but he gave him a good beating. Good beating, and he made him a prisoner. So this is, first of all, this is the another way in which Saint Francis has been depicted. And here we see, this is Francis in captivity. Yeah. So it is said that this room is still there. So he was locked up in that room. But of course, Francis was lucky that his mother was still there. So she saw that there was no change in Francis. He did not care for any whatever torture, etc., might be performed. So when she saw that, she could make out that Francis would not change now. He had received a higher call. So she secretly released him, and he fled to that church again. So again his father came to know. Again he was enraged that his son had escaped. So now what did he do? He called Francis before the bishop. He called Francis before the bishop because he had to get all that money back, which Francis had given to the priest. Maybe the priest had just showed his father, but maybe he had not returned all of it. So he called Francis to the bishop, demanded whatever he wanted. But the bishop was a good person. He knew and admired the sincerity of Francis. So what did he do first? He asked Francis to return to his father whatever money he had. So two motives. First, the father would be pleased, and secondly, once Francis had returned everything, he was not in any obligation. Then he could single-mindedly serve God, because then nobody would have any claim on him. So when Francis heard this from the bishop, he was overjoyed. And he said, "My Lord Bishop, not only will I gladly give back the money which is my father's, but I want to have nothing on my body which belongs to him." So he said, "I will also give up my clothes." And he stripped himself of all garments, and giving up everything, he told all those who were present, "Listen, all of you. I have called Pietro di Bernardone as my father, but now, because I am resolved to serve God, I return to him the money on account of which he was so perturbed, and also the clothes I wore which are his. And from now on I will say, Our Father who art in heaven, and not Father Pietro di Bernardone." So my father is no longer any worldly father. My father is only God. So this is a beautiful painting. You can see that this renunciation of Francis. So formal renunciation, we can tell. Yeah. So it is said that the bishop and all those who were present, they started weeping to see the young man's guilelessness, simplicity. Then bishop gave Francis his own cloak to wear, and now the world had no claim over Francis. So it was what is called, what is sannyasa in Hinduism, monastic vows. So he had no obligation to the world. This took place in 1206. So now Francis had formally renounced the world and was free to follow Christ in poverty and in joy, seeking nothing but to please him, wanting nothing but he wished to give, and being bound to no man but the Son of God. So a lot more remains. We cannot complete it today. So we have to stop here, and we'll continue this next week, because I don't want to give gap on this. So we will, one more discussion we will have. So let us end here. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ram Krishna Namaste.